feminists, you just keep calling something sexist until you have power over it, because that's what you want, you know. So what to do? Now that we're in a place of hopelessness, let's talk about what we can do. So number one, I would say get educated. You came here tonight, very grateful for that. If you had to only read one book, this book is very good, Awake Not Woke. It's my favorite kind of one volume about it. Secondly, don't presume. So sometimes young people will call themselves woke. Sometimes you'll hear people use this kind of language. But there's a big difference between somebody who's like a full-blown ideologue and other people who are just parroting a script. They go to college. Everyone starts to talk like this. They had to declare their privilege on day one. I had somebody I used to work with in my old parish. She was a student at GCU. And in one of her classes, they had to make oppression beads. So they made jewelry, and they got as many beads depending on how oppressed they were. And you would wear those. I'm like, you're paying money for this? Anyway. So, that's the milieu. That's the zeitgeist. That's what's in the air at a lot of colleges. And so you can kind of breathe in that air, and you start to use this language. You don't really know what you're saying. You haven't bought totally into it. You'd be shocked about some of the things the ideologues believe. As my friend Mike Phelan once said, Father, sometimes it feels like there's 100 ideologues controlling 100 million cowards. We're just afraid to speak up to say, hey, this is not right. But it's very important. We're fighting an ideology and not people. We're fighting an ideology and not people. Every person's made in God's image and likeness. We're trying to fight the thing in their mind. And I'll just say from teaching high school, it takes time to help a child get a worldview, like a Catholic worldview. But what it's much easier to do is to poke holes in their worldview. So they know I don't fully agree with my worldview yet, but I've at least poked enough holes in their worldview, like, oh yeah, my worldview doesn't make sense, which then opens them up to being open to another worldview. The best analogy I've thought about when it comes to somebody who's fully bought into wokeism, have any of you seen the movie The Sixth Sense? There's this terrible part of the movie. So there's a boy, I'm about to give away the movie, and he sees dead people. That's like really important. But anyway. And this child dies and then kind of like sends him back to be a voice from the grave. And he was killed by his mother, who would purposely poison his food. And he would like eat his soup, and he's like, it tastes funny. She's like, keep eating it. And it's an example of what's called Munchausen syndromes by proxy. Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is to feel needed and wanted. I purposely poison somebody I love so that they constantly need me. And if I were talking to somebody like Robin DiAngelo, I don't think we're ever going to talk. If it pleases the Lord one day on a plane, it would be hard for me to try to explain to her that she has a form of like Munchausen syndrome by proxy. You're projecting on other people all of this stuff, but you don't see it. It's your worldview. And your worldview is very hard to see because it's not what you see, it's the thing by which you see. That's very hard to critique that. But you can always poke holes where people at least opens them up to have enough doubt. The second thing is to be clear about language. We've already used words like equity, tolerance, discrimination. If you don't know what somebody's saying, be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Or like, what does that mean? Or give me an example. A lot of times these people are parroting scripts and they haven't really thought about it very much. And so when you just ask good questions and you start poking around, they realize like, oh, I don't even know if I believe this. Is this really true or not? Jordan Peterson once was interviewed at the Franciscan University of Steubenville. And at the end, Father Dave Povanka said to him, do you have any advice for us Catholics? And he said, I'm hoping you Catholic types stop being so apologetic about your virtues. And then he says, don't let people weaponize your guilt against you. It's been said that guilt is the currency of wokeness. Because if you're a Catholic and you love God and you love people, and somebody says, oh, there's this terrible racist thing going on, and you might be a part of it. Well, if you're a person with a sense of self-reflection, you might say, oh, okay, well, tell me about that. Like, I'm open to that. It's what I was telling you at the beginning of my talk. People making these videos on the internet. It's like, I know that person and you are not racist, you know? But again, if I feel guilty and somebody's weaponized that against me, I might start to feel like, well, maybe that is true. But when you call somebody racist with no evidence of racism, that's called being a jerk. And you shouldn't do that. It's like, hey, you don't even know me. And you're saying I'm racist because I'm white? Last time I checked, that's racist. And you're imposing it on me right now. So just be careful about words, and also to not be afraid to push back when appropriate. Also be courageous. I think our temptation in our current culture is cowardice. I read a great article years ago called The Zealous Faith of Secularism. And in it, the author, she said, when you begin to realize that the dominant culture is not your culture, you start to circumscribe your own language. In other words, you'll be in a public place and you'll say something like, I don't think a boy can become a girl. And you lower your voice because you know people hear me say this, they're not going to like it. And they did a study some years ago that she mentions in the book where over 60% of people said, I have cultural and political views that I'm afraid to say in public. And so it's really a time where we need people to be courageous to say what they mean. This is an extreme example, I know, but there was a lot of transgender ideology being pushed in Great Britain. And then basically one woman stood up, and her name was J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter. And she said, I've spent my whole life fighting for women's rights, and you're eliminating the category of woman, and I will not stand for it. So I will fight back. Now, she's J.K. Rowling. She's worth $1 billion. She doesn't work for anybody. She can't lose her job. But they have now banned transgender surgeries for minors in Great Britain, and other countries are moving. And I think a significant reason why she had the courage to stand and say, I won't stand for this. I know all of us have to discern what that looks like in our individual lives. Also, to join local school boards, very important decisions are made at school boards, questions of curriculum. And a lot of them you can just petition or just join them. Or you can run for it and get on them. And that can be so helpful. And if somebody has a little bit of knowledge, they can do a lot of good work in preventing a lot of things coming to our children's schools. So in the end, we must reject woke ideology because it elevates the will over reason. It reconstitutes the fundamental relationship between people as power instead of truth and love. And that's not the game that we're playing as Catholics. And God himself is reason. And the best analogy I think was the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel was, we're going to build a tower to heaven by our own power to make our name great. And Marxism is the idea that by our own power, we can build a utopia on earth, which has always led to terrible destruction, rather than allowing God to save us by his grace. It's a weird time to be alive. And there's a story of Saint Joan of Arc. She would go into battle as a teenager. She would not carry a sword. Somebody once said to her, are you afraid? She said, I'm not afraid. God is with me. I was born for this. And I think we should have that kind of confidence that from all of eternity, God willed that we would live at this time to form our intellects into the truth and to fight error in our culture. Amen?
Amen.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Lee. Wow.
Mind if I just do a Q&A?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Well, this was wonderful. Why don't we just stay together in a group, because we only have about 20, 25 minutes, and rather than taking 10 minutes to break into groups, we'll just have an open discussion with Father. Hey, I'd like to ask you.
Yeah, please.
I have many family members and friends who seem rational for many years, and the last 5 or so years have just kind of gone off the edge. And you try to have discussions with them, and everything goes through this filter, and you said, attack the ideology, but you do so, but they attack you. And at some point, you just start to lose patience and say, I feel like I'm talking to a wall. What should we do with our, and it feels like the ideology is starting to lose some momentum here fairly quickly, but what do we do? We've been castigated by, I can say friends, family, don't even want to talk anymore because you're one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple things. The first is I just don't want to underestimate. Some years ago, I wrote a book called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And in it, this guy said he would be talking to a German man who's very interesting, urbane, well-read. And then they would get on a certain topic, and the conversation would go sideways. And he would start saying the craziest anti-Semitic things he'd ever heard. He's talking to this guy, it was a great conversation in a pub. Then he said, well, I reject Albert Einstein because he's doing Jew physics. And he was like, Jew physics? What is that? He said, well, they're using physics to take over the world. And his point was, they had a guy named Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda. And when you receive a message every day, and even if it got from a guy named the minister of propaganda, that has an effect on us. When people come to Mass and hear a 12-minute homily, but then they go home and watch 20 hours of Netflix, that is forming their intellect. So my point is that they can be deeply formed in this because the movies they watch and the books they read, and that could be. Everyone has to make a decision. As Jesus says, you judge a tree by its fruit, whether it's fruitful. There may be people in your life where you've made the decision, it's just not fruitful. It always leads to a fight. It's always unpleasant. And these ideologies are not true. And when things that aren't true, eventually they collapse. Black Lives Matter, what did that ever do for black people? Besides burn down their own neighborhoods. And the people who did it bought themselves mansions. And they said, we're trained Marxists. Well, if you were behind that movement, now looking back said, oh, the person who just questioned me about that, like, hey, have you checked out the website? There's some things in there I don't know if you would agree with. It's like, oh, that actually can't be true. So I guess what I'm saying is having the patience to see that you judge a tree by its fruits, and hopefully they'll see the destruction of these things, or at least where it starts to falter, and then maybe be open to what you actually have to say.
Great.
Other questions? Yes, please.
So, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Father Perks. What's your first name? What's your name?
John.
John.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm trying to figure out. I mean, you said so many good things.
I know.
And
a lot of
the
things.
oppressor's category.
No, I said a lot of things. Just a lot of things. Yeah.
But I'm trying to figure out who defines.
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
Yes.
Got a full house here. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm trying to figure out who defines the oppressor category. Like, how do you decide who's allowed to be called an oppressor? I mean, I know you did like the women and then the bourgeois and all that stuff. But like, just for today, like, if you were to look at just our politics or whatever you want to call it in general, how do you label someone as an oppressor? And for example, why would I label him as an oppressor because he's a white man, or me as the oppressed because I'm a woman, when I never really thought about being that as I was growing up? And now that you brought that out, it's like, well, who defines who an oppressor is, right? Aside from Freud and the Mark that you just mentioned. So I'm a little like trying to figure that out. Like, how does that come about? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, simply put, that's what the ideology is doing. And in their perception, whoever has the power, they would say only got it through oppression. So if we look at economics, and if per capita household income among white families is higher than black families, they have that power through some nefarious thing. Now, oftentimes in these conversations, Asians are not included because Asians have the highest per capita, and things like culture never matter, which really have a huge effect on our lives, but just things like race. So to answer your question, because Marxism has met the Frankfurt School, which metastasized it, depending on what their cudgel is or what their hammer is, they're just going to call the thing oppressive, even if it's not. So what you just said is so unbelievably delightful. I can't believe you just said that. Like, I've never even thought in those terms. That's the proper way. We now have things where this happens in public schools, and like first graders, they will line them up. The teacher will line them up according to their oppression. Like, oh, you're a white boy and your parents are married, you're going to be all the way to the right. And you are a Native American girl, and you are non-binary, we're going to put you all to the left. They actually have students do this. And what that leads to is division. And I remember this powerful interview by a guy named John Anderson. He's interviewing a guy named Douglas Murray. And he's basically talking about some of these tactics. And he says, they say they're fighting racism or oppression, but that's going to just cause greater division. And he explodes. And he says, that's the point. That's the point. That the kid you got along with just fine in the school board, now he's 6 people ahead of me in the oppression game. It's like, maybe I shouldn't like him. And as Noah Lang says, when we de-emphasize race, you know what it usually leads to? Friendship. Because we just see people as people. So what you just said is the solution. That somebody just said, that's not how I see the world. I'm a person, that's a person, and that's who I am. So the answer is whoever has the ideology from whatever perspective, feminist, that's what they're going to go after. But yeah, so you're welcome. Yes, Deacon. Oh, sorry.
I've only been in the parish since September,
Yes.
and I've been helping you with OCIA, which used to be called RCIA, and that's a target for another day. And Maddie and Nathan are in that OCIA class that we're in. The other day, I'm sitting there listening to you, and I'm thinking, I got to ask Maddie this question. So I go up to her and I say, Is there anything that Father Parks doesn't know?
Oh, wow.
And she says, no.
Wow.
We are all, I know, I'm sure I speak for everyone here, we are all immensely grateful that you're here with us.
Thanks.
And that single parent of yours done real good.
Amen. She's a good lady. She's a good lady. Please pray for my mom. She's a good lady. She's a good lady. Yes. We'll go here and then here. Oh, press her.
Father. So I just want to ask,
Yes.
who are they in this context of discussion? The woke movement, in my opinion, seems to have, really blown up in the last 4 years. So is this the liberal movement? I mean, I think that's the easy perception. Is it the Department of Education? Is it George Soros? Who is they? And why do they seem to have suddenly, rushed upon us in a way that maybe they haven't since Marx? I mean, or I don't know, maybe there was another jump in the 70s with, a lot of those movements, but it seems like it rolls with party. So I'd just like your opinion on that.
Yeah, great. Great question. What you're saying reminds me of something that Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said. He lived through the Gulag in Russia. And he said, if only there was some group of terrible people, some evil out there, that we could just find them and eliminate them. But he said the problem is that the line between good and evil goes down the center of every human heart. That I'm in my own battle, and the problem is inside of me. And then he said, who wants to cut out a piece of their own heart? So my point is that, again, people are complex. People have imbibed different levels of this ideology. Somebody said before the talk, I hope you define wokeism, because sometimes people just call things woke they don't like. Like, oh, that's woke. McDonald's raising their prices? That's so woke. So then the word is like, what does it mean, So I think our solution, though, would be when we see it or it becomes prominent, is to poke holes at it and to question it, and when appropriate, to fight back. Because that's just what's needed. And something that pops in my mind is, as we say, tolerance never works both ways. So the man who thinks he's caught in the wrong body and thinks he's a woman and wants to use the changing area at the YMCA, and the mother says, there's a man in there. They said, well, you need to be tolerant. And she says, well, somebody needs to be tolerant of my 11-year-old, who's a girl who feels unsafe. And it's like, well, you're being transphobic. It's like, well, so tolerance doesn't work both ways. And these are the kind of things that we just have to call out and to use the words properly. So there's just no, we always want to find like some sort of cabal, like these 4 people are doing all of it. One thing I want to prove tonight, and you said, why give this talk now? It looks like things like this, like that are adjacent, like DEI, are kind of on the way out. But ideologies do not die quickly. And hopefully you got tonight, these were built over time. One of the mantras was the long, slow march through the institutions. That was a famous Marxist thing. And so they were very intentional about getting into schools, getting tenure. And then you teach sociology, but what you really teach is this ideology. Because the school exists for social change, not for truth, So, it can't be as easily delineated. Does that make sense? Yes.
I think the good thing is that we're seeing left and right working together against this. I mean, you got a Kennedy working with Trump. That's that's kind of crazy. My question is, growing up in the social media world, I do see now the Catholic Church bleeding into this ideology. You do have priests preaching this wokeism. You see that Protestant churches, whatever 1 million denomination is, they're very into it. What is the Catholic Church doing to keep the Catholic Church from becoming a mind virus of this? Because we've worked really hard our children to accept the Catholic way of life. They're wanting to be more part of the Catholic Church, go to Catholic school. Now my worry is, well, are they just going to be learning the same junk that we've been having to protect them with the public school system?
Yeah, a couple of things. The first is, I mention this about every 3 months in homilies, what's called the circle of influence versus circle of concern. That for all of us, we have a circle of concern that's bigger than our circle of influence. And a circle of influence is things that I have power over. A circle of concern is I'm concerned about them, but I don't have any real power. And when we focus too much on our circle of concern, our circle of influence shrinks. When we focus on the things that I do have power of, our circle of influence grows. When you study to be a priest, the first thing you study is not theology. You first study philosophy. You usually take 2 years of that. Because you have to learn how to think and to think properly before thinking properly about God. So the church has this understanding that if you don't have a philosophical underpinning, it's very easy to get swept up with this stuff because you don't realize what you're imbibing, which is like when my friends read White Fragility and they were sort of responding to these things. All I can tell you is I'm not woke and Father Jess is not woke. So for us being here, if you're going to come to, yeah, thank you. So if you come to Our Lady of Joy, I can't obviously make it. Yeah, I would also just say with schools in particular, they've had a huge effect on universities. And a lot of people, John Dewey trained like a generation of teachers, and they were formed in some of this ideology. So schools in particular have been easy targets for the ideology. I would say if you're checking out a school, I would meet with the principal directly. And a question I love to ask Catholic principals is, can you just name like one or the two greatest problems in our culture? And how is Catholic education a response to that or the solution to it? And you get a good understanding by what they say of kind of where they stand.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Dana.
I don't need my.
Okay.
So I had a practicing Catholic encourage me to read the White Fragility book, and I was like, something about this is not settling well with me. But so I have a question about that, and kind of tying into the university students. All my kids went through university, and what's the simplest way to without preaching, preach the gospel without using words, to let them know, look, this is a serious flaw. I'm not as versed as you are. We could have you over for dinner, Father.
I'll start the tour. Oh, yeah.
You will know. But I'm not as versed as you are. And so is it, and I don't know if they would read a book, like what's a good way to just kind of open that discussion and be like, On the other hand, there's the Catholics. This is what we believe as Catholics. Is it one of the books? I mean...
As far as your children, it's always good to have the open doors of communication so that they can say those things, especially things that you disagree with. It's a great sign when they say those things in front of you. And again, to just getting curious is very powerful. Like, what do you think about that? What do you believe about that? In my experience with young people, when they have permission to say it, sometimes they're like, I get it. Like, I don't want to be racist or sexist, but my college it's getting weird, So they have this instinct of like, because there's the freedom to say it, like, this is going sideways. Now they're taking on things that I never thought. I think a great way is books or CDs. I know you said that, do people have CDs anymore? Yeah. But the thing about a book is you can give it to somebody and they can not read it for 6 or 7 months and then one day pick it up when they're feeling bored and just read a couple chapters. So I think that can be helpful at least to plan it. But these are ideologies and you can't dismantle them in 5 minutes. We're talking about worldview, and worldview is built over a long period of time, which is why I said earlier, oftentimes when I'm engaging with somebody, I can at least poke holes in their worldview to keep them open to like, oh, I never really thought about that, or yeah, I guess they're trying to fight racism, but they are being racist. That's a really good point. But if they are willing to read the book, they ask you to read that book, and you can say, okay, I'll read your book, and we can discuss it, and then you read a book I want, and then we'll discuss it. So at least you go back and forth in that way. Anyone else?
John, can I just ask one more
Yes.
question? Please, double dipping.
Oh yeah, sure, no problem.
I'm sorry, I was just thinking, and you can say no flat out, just real
Okay.
quick. So is Catholicism, is that also built on a type of ideology or religion?
Great question. Excellent question. So Karl Marx changed the definition of ideology. It was coined by a French guy. It just meant kind of like a worldview. But Karl Marx then used it because he didn't believe in truth. Ideology was basically the propaganda of your position to stay in power. So that's one definition of ideology. Another one is it's when you take part of the truth and you make it a whole truth, which is to make it an untruth. Is there racism in America's founding? Yeah. Is there slavery in America's founding? Yes. Can America be defined simply by those things? No. You would be mistelling our story. You'd be taking part of our history, and you'd be making it our whole history, which is to make it an untruth. So oftentimes by ideologies, it's not totalizing. So I'm Catholic. I believe that there's a narrative that explains all of reality, which would be like the gospel, and we had a cosmic shipwreck in Genesis chapter 3, and God has come to save us, and he formed a people called Israel, and so on and so forth. Postmodern people, they have what's called, they don't believe in any grand narratives. So again, there is no ultimate truth that's true for everybody. So all of us are like tanks claiming truth, but it's really just about power. We just use words to get power. So ideology, I think, there's two different ways to understand it. It's a reduction. It's taking part of the truth and making it the whole truth, leaves you with whatever lens they have. Or they don't believe in truth, and they're just saying it's the way you stay in power. But I think Catholicism is true, and I came to know it through faith and reason, and it explains, it's a totalizing explanation. Does that make sense?
Basically.
Okay. I said a lot of big words. I don't even know what half those words meant. I just like to say that.
You can tell you took philosophy.
Yeah, I know. Yikes.
Have you watched Conclave yet?
No, heavens no. I saw somebody do a movie review of it. I was like, oh, unbelievable. Yeah. God. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Please. Okay.
Catholicism is not an ideology. You left that
Yes.
part off to answer the question. Catholicism, it's a religion, but it's the one started by Christ. And words are not all written, so we use tradition to pass that on, and those are not ideologies.
Yeah, it's truth. Yeah, the gospel is truth. It's true. It knows you better than you know yourself. That's pretty good. Yes.
Is there room for power? Maybe a differentiation between power and authority?
Yes.
One of the things on the overhead was get on the school board, and presumably, I would want people on the school board whose ideology matched ours in the room, and that they would use that authority to influence in a way that I would see as positive. So I know that we use that term power, and I know it's probably different than how you're using it in this context, but I do want to use power against those who want to use it in furtherance of this ideology. So that's kind of...
Yeah, that's an excellent. So the power is a part of life. They're saying that the most fundamental thing about life is power. Power is not bad as long as you use it in accordance with truth and use it to serve what is good. So she makes a distinction between authority and authoritarianism. So authority, Luigi, is when you're given power by a higher authority and you are responsible to it. So a police officer has an authority and a power in our culture, but he serves the chief of police and justice, and will lose his power if he violates that authority. The President of the United States has a lot of power, but he swears an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, and he's ultimately answerable to the people. If he starts going roughshod over the Constitution or the other branches of government, he's falling into an authoritarianism where he's just exercising his will, and he's not subservient to anyone. So power is not bad as long as it's rooted to a proper authority. Authoritarianism is my will as its own justification, meaning I just get to do what I want. So yes, power is a good thing. We need power. We want the right people to have power, and those are the people who use it to further truth. That's a really good point. Yes?
I just have a statement about question number 2. How should the Catholic Church respond to woke ideology?
Yes, sir.
Maybe it's my simple mind, but to me it's simple. Know your Bible, know your catechism, that's your foundation, and that's all you need to, fight wokeness or fight the world. So, it's simple.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, the ultimate response to wokeism is the gospel. It's evangelization. Because ostensibly, if people are drawn to this, they want unity, and there is a way to have unity. You know what has a lot of diversity? Heaven. John has a vision, and he says, every tribe, every tongue, every nation, and their unity is in Christ. It's a real unity built in love and truth. So that's right. The ultimate response to wokeism is the gospel. That's always the answer. And it's slow work. Sometimes when things are political, we want to change them quickly, but